Welcome to the last of our series on topics in tech with the CIS Sandbox and former tutors. Before we start, I want to alert you to something that's coming up soon. It's the last Sandbox event of the semester, and it's going to be happening on December 4th. We're going to be having an open house, a virtual open house. It's going to be on December 4th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we'll be sending out email to your teachers about this as well, and it's on the Sandbox website. It'll be about an hour, and some of the Sandbox tutors will be sharing some of their technology projects and stories, so you can see what they're up to. It uses the same Sandbox Zoom room that you use all the time, and this is a special one for us because it's our 10th year in the CIS Sandbox, so we'll have a chance to look back at how the Sandbox has evolved over that time as well. So please join us on Friday, December 4th at 2 o'clock for our open house event. Our first speaker today is Rachid Macer, who is a recent Bentley grad and is now working at Uber, and is going to talk about strategy and security at Uber. So welcome.
Awesome. As Professor Fardenberg said, I'll be talking about security strategy at Uber and amongst other topics, my journey at Bentley, and a little bit about what I do in my free time with applied learning. So just a rough overview of the agenda here. So as I mentioned, my Bentley journey, a little bit about applied learning, how I really got here at Uber and the security world, then diving into really my knowledge-based security strategy, starting with the why. So why do we do security strategy? Why is it important to really have security? And then how we implement security. And then a little case study about something that I've done in my own time at Uber and what the future of security really looks like. And then I'll open up the floor for a little bit of Q&A. So my Bentley journey, right? I entered Bentley in 2014 and really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to be in the business world, right? Like many of you who want to pursue entrepreneurship or accounting, for example. So I know my first semester, I really enjoyed the accounting classes. And those GBs really highlighted some things that I was interested in. Then it got a little bit harder, and then I slowly veered away. And IT 101 was one of those few courses that I really excelled at. And I felt that really aligned with some of my interests. So I really absorbed that content, discovered things in the IT world that I found interesting. So then jumping into sophomore year, where it's time to declare your major and really dive deeper into those applied learnings. So I chose a few beginner CIS courses, namely, I think it was the Java beginner course, and I believe the database management course. And those are two great courses that really allowed me to develop my skills, specifically a little bit of coding and a little bit of database management with SQL. And I felt that those really gave a high level understanding of a deeper look at what tech can look like in the business world. So then jumping into junior year, right? You have a little bit more background of the CIS landscape. You have more learning, so why not challenge yourself? So I challenged myself with a few harder courses, specifically the Android Studio course. Like Professor Pepe was teaching that at the time. And that was really great. It allowed me to really hone in on some of those skills, and a few other courses like project management in the IT world. And then jump into senior year at Bentley, 2018. That was a tough year because you have to figure out what your interests are, and specifically, how do you align your major with your interests, right? You choose the CIS major, and now it's time to say, hey, do I want to go down the project management route? Do I want to be a software engineer? Do I want to be XYZ, right? And it's really figuring out what your strengths are, what you want to do, and what that path looks like. So for me, it was jumping into Ernst & Young and going through their technology advisory program, which I think is a great opportunity because it exposes you to not one specific domain and knowledge base. They really align multiple service lines or what they call domains with their business practice. So you're able to actually hone in on multiple different skills, and you're not doing one thing for the first year out of college, which was really great and got me to where I am here today. So this little piece about applied learning, it'll come back in my later slide, but I wanted to dive deep into this really quickly because I think it's super important as a CIS student and major to really focus on applied learning in and outside of the classroom. And I think Bentley does a really great job doing that. So specifically asking yourself, why are you learning what you are learning, right? So let's take examples from like CS350. You're learning about database management in Oracle and using SQL, right? Why is it important to learn database management and managing your data properly, right? And then from there, what can you do with what you learned, right? So you have an understanding of how to set up a database. Now, what can you do with that? Why is that important? And then how can you do XYZ? So how can you set up that database and get really applied learning hands-on, doing it yourself in step 4 right there. And I think those are very important steps outside of the classroom and inside the classroom to really develop an understanding of what you're learning and the topics that you get from your courses at Bentley. So how I got here, specifically security at Uber. So I mentioned that I graduated and went to EY for my first job out of college. And that was a great opportunity because it gave me the ability to learn and absorb what I hadn't learned in college, right? We all graduate and the first job, there's so much material out there that you haven't learned in school. And that's okay, that's fine. But now it's the time to kind of take a step back and redo what you did in college and learn again and absorb. So that gave me the ability to learn, absorb, and then explore new projects from what I learned and what I absorbed, right? So then from there, applied learning again. You've learned this new material at your first job. You got to apply it somewhere so you can actually develop that skill. And once you develop that skill, you can highlight that skill set on the job, whether it's process improvement, enhancement, what have you, right? So then jumping into my current role, security strategy at Uber, what really got me here was challenging myself when I was at EY to make sure I was going above and beyond and really learning things that my peers weren't and highlighting those skills. And that really aligned with my interests at the time. And that's really how I got here right now. So now jumping into security strategy, and really this is what my knowledge base is and what my current role is. And I'm just gonna read a quick quote that I found online. Organization security strategy needs to be tailored to the individual industry and the specific threats that an enterprise faces. So what that really means is there's no one size fits all security strategy, right? At a high level, you can implement that, but down the line, things need to be tailored to your specific industry, right? So something that works for Uber is not gonna work for, let's say, Twitter or Instagram, right? Uber is in that physical digital enterprise, whereas Instagram is really just a digital. So things are gonna change and ebb and flow wherever you go. So from a security strategy perspective, there's really one overarching goal, right? And that's protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information related to people, processes, and technologies, or what we call the CIA triad. So that's super important, especially in today's day and age, because when you have intellectual property, you have data from customers, that's a specific value to your company, right? And once that goes and it's entered the public world, you're looking at a loss of their intellectual property, customer data, what have you. So it's very important that we make sure that we're protecting that information. And in security strategy, it's important to start with the why, right? So why should we protect our data and technologies? And to be quite honest, it is a burden for most companies to enforce security, right? There's really no value. It's not an engine for the company to actually produce dollars, right? It's a burden. It's a sunk cost. But at this point in time, it's important because you need to keep that information safe. Like I said, if that information is leaked or comes out, you can lose intellectual property. Your business can be tarnished. Um, and specifically, compliance fines if you're breached, litigation fees, criminal investigations, your reputation, which is huge nowadays. And those are all super important. And just to give a rough idea of the dollar amount that you could be looking at, I think as of 2019, per record that is breached, it's roughly $150 cost to a company, right? So you can imagine when you scale up like the size of Uber or an Instagram or a Google, $150 times millions of users, that's going to add up, right? And then you have to add in all the other fees that you're going to be fined, right? And then your reputation. People won't be willing to actually use your product anymore. And to enforce that, it's important to gain trust from the users, right? If you can gain trust from the users, you're doing security right, and you can enforce an actual good security program. So now implementing strategy or security, right? And you can see the picture on the right from the movie Dodgeball. If you're if you're able to have a good security strategy, you can really dodge a lot of the threats that are posed to your organization. You won't be able to dodge all of them, but 90% of them, or whatever range of threshold, you'll be able to dodge. So this little quote right here, in order to secure your organization's information, you have to understand the risks posed to your organization, right? And that really goes down to understanding what your organization is composed of. And there's a framework that we use, it's called NIST. And that's a framework that really identifies how you can actually protect your organization in 5 steps, right? So that first step is identify. And what you're identifying is the assets or the most valuable things in your organization, right? The gold, as we call it, of your organization. And once you can identify those assets and that value of your organization, you'll have an understanding of what risks there are. So now that you understand and you've identified those assets in your organization and you've identified those risks, it's not time to go to step 2 to prevent and protect your organization, right? So you want to prevent any attacks and threats from happening to your organization. And how do we do that? So we use things called controls, right? When you have controls in place, these are mechanisms to prevent vulnerabilities from happening, right? These are just mitigations. It's not 100%, but it's better than nothing. And 9 times out of 10, it'll help in the event of a threat actor trying to actually exploit some vulnerability. So then step 3, right? We need to detect if anything's going on. So how do we do this? And luckily in our day and age, there's millions of companies out there that can do this for you. So they'll monitor your endpoints, for example. I know Bentley does this as well. They'll monitor what's going on in your network. And that's how you can detect an intrusion or whatever exploitation that's going on. And then in step 4, respond. So if we do detect something bad has happened, we need to respond to that as soon as possible. And that's really gonna be the tone from the top. How do we actually attack what happened and respond to that threat? And after that, it's important to recover. So what are the lessons learned from all of those steps? What are the lessons learned from responding to that threat or that vulnerability? And how can we move forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Or if it does happen, how can we act quicker to make sure it's not as impactful? And then just jumping into a quick case study. And this is specific to my role and specific to Uber as well. So estimates indicate that 60% of breaches are linked to third parties and is increasing year over year. which is a very, very large amount of numbers. So if you can imagine a company like Uber or even Bentley, for example, uses so many different third parties to empower the business and to run, right? For example, I believe Bentley uses Office 365. That's a third party. And if there is a breach on the Microsoft Office side, that could potentially impact Bentley. So it's important to make sure that you have controls in place. So if that does occur, your information won't be either lost or impacted, or the integrity won't be affected. So third-party risk management at Uber. So that's a work stream that I have contributed at Uber, and quite frankly, it's a very new space in the security world. I know Uber they just started this up 2 years ago, and many other companies are very young in this space. So there's no predefined playbook. There's no real set of instructions of how do you set this up and do this the right way, which is awesome because it allows you to really do things how you see fit and to be as effective and efficient as you want to be, right? It's almost like a startup where everyone's all hands and you don't have a clear set of instructions to get to point A or B. So that's really nice. But how do we do third-party risk management at Uber and across other organizations? So that first step is really identifying your third-party inventory. So what are your suppliers? Who are you using? Who are you getting software from? Who are you getting consultants from, for example? So you just want to understand what your third-party inventory looks like across the whole entire company globally. So then you're defining the scope of third parties that you want to actually make part of this risk management program, right? All companies have like an invoice for, let's say, catering. That's not really going to be in scope. A catering company doesn't pose much threat to the business, right? Compared to like a Google, where people store their information in like Google Sheets and Google Docs, right? So it's important to really have an understanding of what your inventory looks like, and then scoping down the inventory to make sure you're getting the right subset of third parties, right? And that really comes from your supplier team or your accounts payable team. So then next is conducting these risk assessments on these third parties that are in scope, right? So what does that look like? So a risk assessment is, to put it in layman terms, it's a survey, it's a questionnaire, right? It can be however many questions you want, but it's on the business and the third party to have this questionnaire filled out as detailed as possible so we can understand the relationship from Uber and said third party. And from that relationship, we can understand what data is in transit, what data is being shared, if we are the data controller, if they are the data processor, and a lot of other information that is really key to understand your risk. So after you conduct those risk assessments, and that's an ongoing thing, as soon as you get a third party, you're monitoring those third parties continuously, right? And some are going to be higher threats to your organization than others, right? So how do you prioritize that? And like I mentioned, you're gonna have a risk severity on each third party, or a scoring on each third party, right? Whether that's high, medium, low, or critical. You have to understand what that risk is to your organization if you want to monitor them continuously and properly. So it's important to do that, specific to Uber and many organizations outside of Uber. But aside from third-party risk management, it's important to do, amongst other things, have a good policies and standards in place. And that's another work stream that I've worked on at Uber as well. A company that is so large as Uber, that spans from, oh man, I think we're in 70 plus countries now. You have to have a clear set of rules, policies, and standards so that employees can follow that, and that you aren't left with individuals going and downloading XYZ, right? That might pose a threat to your organization. You don't want individuals storing PII in an unapproved storage, right? Unless it's like you want like Box or like Google Drive, for example. Those are important um, tools that we need to understand, so that way the organization can operate effectively and cohesively as well. And the list goes on and on and on, of the different realms that you want to focus on um, from an organization perspective. And to focus on the future of security, which I find very interesting, um, I'm just going to read this quick quote as well. History repeats itself, but in such cunning disguise that we never detect the resemblance until the damage is done. I found that really interesting because we were seeing that even today, right? Security used to be physical. Back in like the 80s and the 70s, you would have a security guard in front of your company or at the front desk. And while we still do, security is now also digital. And that poses so many risks to organizations, right? So now you have physical and digital combined from an organization, and those lines are really blurred. You don't know what to actually focus on because they're almost synonymous, right? So let's take Uber helicopters, for example. That alone is the perfect example of physical and digital blurring together and being meshed. Or let's say Tesla, for example. That's an even better example of physical and digital. A self-driving vehicle. The risks there are so huge and inherent that if you don't have good security, there's a number of things that can just go wrong, right? Let's say somebody is able to get into Tesla's network, right? Or whatever servers they have and affect some code that might be hosted there that really helps the self-driving code for whatever vehicles. If somebody is able to get into that and affect that code, and somebody uses a self-driving application on their vehicle, so many bad things can happen if the threat actor does any malicious intent. So right there, that's really what we're looking at for the future of security, right? So how do we bridge this gap between physical and digital and understand what that risk is on both ends and manage how to secure holistically, right? We can't just focus on one or focus more on the other. We have to combine them and focus as a whole. So I found that very, very interesting. And it's so new that the learning is very fresh. And it just allows you to actually have a better understanding of security when both are together. So now I wanted to open up the floor for questions and answers for you guys here.
Cool, thanks. Can you stop sharing so we can see everybody? Okay, so who has questions or comments or things that you learned from Rachid's presentation about security and this idea of blurring the line between physical and digital,
Yeah,
which I don't know if you heard, I've heard referred to as phygital.
I do have a question. So Rashid, you talked a little bit about security of data as well, and more focused towards my question, more focused towards the digital. Have you watched the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so as a security strategist, I wanted to know what was your view on the documentary, like how prominent is it, and how has it affected you, your job, or at Uber, or what do you see more or less in the industry, if you agree with it or not, or all that.
Yeah, so that docu-series is really great because for one, it highlights a lot of what we don't see um, from a lens, right? Everyone's always on their phones. All this data is being gathered, it's being processed, and bam, you're being targeted with ads. You're on your phone longer, X, Y, Z. From a data security perspective, I think it's important for the organization to make sure they're managing that properly, right? Because it can get out of hand, and people that can get access to that have unlimited control over the user, right? So from my perspective, they're coming from an angle that's 100% true and right. But I would also like to add that it's important for the user to understand where their data is going, right? If you're signing up for your Facebook or your Instagram or whatever application it is, you have to understand that once you give them that data, oh man, the possibilities are endless. And we've seen that from TikTok, right? TikTok is such a new app, and I said this 2 years ago when I heard about them. I was like, this is going to be revolutionary because they're collecting so many data points on one individual that they can use that to their advantage, right? They can spin up their own advertising platform even better than Facebook's, because over the course of time, the more and more data you can collect, the more accurate you can be with targeting, for example, and understanding what a user is going to do and predicting the future of a user's habits. So it's really crazy what's going on. But from a data security perspective, I think it's important that companies have an understanding of what they're doing with that data and how they're securing it, because keeping that inside the closed walls of an organization is imperative, because once that's gone and was released to the public, possibilities are endless. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does perfectly. Thank you, Rachid.
Thank you.